Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, with deep gratitude for all the generations before us that have brought us to the present place, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we continue our discussion of the Supreme Court and the rulings that it has made over the last several weeks as the extreme right wing of the political spectrum has demonstrated that it is very serious about altering the rights of Americans and Native Americans in particular, along with women, and posing a challenge to all of us who are seeking a more perfect union and a more abundant understanding of inclusivity and how, as the human family evolves, we can be not only more inclusive of everybody, however diverse, but we can be more equitable with a justice tempered by mercy and with a perspective that honors the larger ecology of which we're a part here on planet Earth, but more fundamentally than that, the larger ecology of the cosmos as we know it, which is emerging as teeming with other intelligent life. So we are in that discussion. We'll be continuing it into next week. And so I want to just honor all of us as we gather today for the kinds of discussions that distinguish Humanity Rising as we seek day by day, over 2.5 years now of broadcasting live worldwide, to bring to you the kind of issues and the kind of thoughtful intellectuals and activists and leaders who are literally on the cutting edge of what it means to be human as we face unprecedented crises, but with an understanding that inherent in every crisis is an opportunity. And our job here at Humanity Rising is to be ruthlessly realistic about the crisis, but abundant and optimistic and full of hope about the opportunities, because that's what's going to enable humanity to rise. So thank you, everyone, and welcome. And before we jump in and bring back my good friend and colleague, Daniel Sheehan, let us just pause as we always do, and with a thankful heart, grateful that we're alive at this moment in history. Let us just center ourselves in our bodies. Let us close our eyes and find our hearts and attune ourselves for just a minute as we listen to the Ave Maria with each other, and let us feel the opportunities inherent in oneness. Thank you, everyone. As we begin our program, as I did yesterday, I want to emphasize that here at Humanity Rising, we are really focused all year on what we're calling inner regeneration. We're very mindful that people all over the world not only are increasingly challenged by ecological turbulence, but also by now the realities of war, economic, political, cultural foment and contradictions of all kinds. And people are really stressed. And people need solace in how to just maintain their emotional and their psychological equilibrium as the world spins further and further out of control. Most of you are on the front lines somewhere. You're doing what needs to be done. You also need to be who you need to be to do what you need to do. And that's the real focus of Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising, is to bring to your attention opportunities of how you can fortify your soul so that you can be more effectively active in the frontiers of social justice. I mentioned an upcoming course on positive psychology. It's a 9-month course on how you can orient yourself internally for dealing with the kinds of stresses that all of us are encumbered by. And we'll put the link in the chat box. I also mentioned our pilgrimage coming up to Chartres in France, which is an opportunity for the first time in 3 years since before COVID, where we're gathering people together in a place for over 3,000 years associated with the divine feminine. People in pain, you want their mothers. And it's time more than ever before in our lifetime where we need to turn to the Great Mother, and to the Black Madonna, and to the feminine in all her depth and capacity to hold us with a nurturing container that sustains our capacity to be who we need to be in a turbulent world. So I'll put those links up in a moment. But now it is my great pleasure to welcome back my good friends. We were just counting up. Danny and I have been friends for 49 years. We met at Harvard back in 1973. And what I can say about Danny Sheehan, boy, is he's been on the front line since before I knew him and ever since, with a clarity of purpose and with a depth of heart and with a love for democracy and human rights and human freedom and justice and equality that is virtually without peer in the circle of people that I know. So it's a great honor for me personally to be able to bring Danny back on. He's going to conclude the 2 days that we set aside for the Supreme Court. He'll be back next Monday and Tuesday. We'll talk about that toward the end of the program. But Danny, welcome back to Humanity Rising. And we're going to start, as we indicated yesterday, with Danny sharing with us his reflections on what happened in January 6th of 2021, when, as you all know, there was an insurrection and mob takeover of the Capitol building, supported and aided and abetted, instigated by Donald Trump. And then he's going to segue from that and talk about the various rulings in the recent weeks by the Supreme Court that are challenging liberty and democracy as we know it. So Danny, thank you, welcome, and take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Jim. Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are in the world today. Great. This, what Jim has pointed out is that we seem to be in a period of significant disorientation right now. As we've discussed, that we have gone through an election that has taken place with President Biden winning the presidency, in a sense, taking the presidency away from Donald Trump and one of the two political parties here in the United States, the Republican Party, unseating them, as it were, from control of the executive branch here in the United States, the most politically powerful military power in the history of the world. And the experiment that's been undertaken here in this United States politically has always esteemed the ability to pass power from one executive administration to a different administration with peaceful transition. The acknowledgement on the part of one of the two political parties that got fewer votes, allegedly, than the other, stepping into power, and the other party stepping back. And what we've seen happen here is that Donald Trump and the Republican Party refused to step down, tried to actually mobilize a riotous mob of people and call them to come to Washington, D.C. to basically physically attack the Capitol building, to stop the peaceful constitutional transition of power from Donald Trump and the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. Now, we began our discussion yesterday by trying to orient our discussion of the Supreme Court decisions that followed this transition. And what we are witnessing right now, not only as American citizens, but people of the world, we see three at least major disorienting activities underway right now. The one that we're talking about here today has to do with for example, the weekly hearings that are being undertaken by our United States Congress, the legislative branch of our federal government, investigating the role of former President Donald Trump in mobilizing and summoning this riotous mob to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th of 2021, and basically attacking the Capitol building. So we see these extraordinarily disquieting hearings taking place, sort of one a week or so, and everyone is being kind of stunned by the detail of information that's available, showing how clear it is that Donald Trump and his acolytes were actively and consciously engaged in attempting to knowingly deny the validity of the election. And these hearings that are being set forth by the United States Congress are presenting the information to the whole public to show how clear it is that this has happened. And the reason why they feel that it's necessary to point this evidence out in graphic detail is because there is a percentage of the people in our country, approximately 18 to 20% of the people in the country, who had become attached to Donald Trump and the policies that he was promulgating to such an extent that they were willing to, in a sense, almost take up arms to keep him in office. And so therefore, the legislative branch of our government believes that it's essential to try to point out not only to the 20 to 22% of us, or excuse me, the 82% of us who are convinced that this was a legal election and that President Biden is the president of the United States. But they believe that it's important for us to present evidence to the other 18 to 20% of the people that they've been lied to and they've been deceived by Donald Trump and his acolytes into believing as they did that the election was in fact illegitimate and that it was an unlawful and unconstitutional attempt to seize power on the part of the Democratic Party. So that process is going on right now. And what it's doing is it's causing to tremble the kind of foundations of our government on which most people rely more or less unconsciously as kind of the undergirding base for their daily lives. They don't need to worry about the government falling. They rely upon it. They take instructions from it. And so this type of confrontation going on at the base of our American government has caused many people to become disoriented. And on top of these almost weekly hearings, public hearings that are not only broadcast live on television, but are rehashed and revisited, throughout the next few days in the remainder of the week, reviewing that information, emphasizing the import of that information, and so that there are not only the actually live hearings, but there's the revision and or review of those hearings that are going on, disorienting the people. And now, directly on the heels of that sort of weekly process of disorientation, we have the week that was the last week of June of 2022, virtually daily, a decision on the part of the United States Supreme Court, disorienting people further, telling the country that what they thought or what we thought were our rights, in fact, are no longer our rights. The lead case of these 5 cases, one each week during the weekdays of the last week of June, was of course Dobbs versus the Jackson Women's Health Organization, a women's health center that provided contraceptive information, health services for women in general, and also provided abortion services for women legally and constitutionally. And what that case was the challenge on the part of the extremely reactionary elements in the country, utilizing the issue of women's rights, and more specifically the understood right to abortion, as a wedge to drive a wedge into the American people to unseat, if they can, the liberal and progressive forces, and even the moderate forces in the country. And that case was a decision on the part of the U.S. Supreme Court, 6-3, to remove what was understood by the vast majority of the people in the country to be a fundamental constitutional right of women to determine their own health and body and reproductive decisions. And so that was a bit of a thunderbolt that struck into the country, even though it had been presaged, because uniquely sort of in history, this decision, that the majority opinion of which was written by Justice Alito, had been leaked to the world by someone in the circles of the Supreme Court. And so the actual opinion itself had been publicly released and people had read it, or at least heard a lot about it. But when it actually came down in that last week of June. And people realized that Justice Roberts, even in spite of the fact that Alito's draft opinion had been made public weeks earlier, had not removed Alito as the justice that could write the opinion, quote, for the court, but had left him in place to have that decision be the one that 95% of all the people read and understand to be the opinion of, quote, the court. So that thunderbolt struck early in the week of the last week of June, but it was followed even as the news people and editorial people lamented and complained and expressed outrage over what had been done. The echoes of that shock had not subsided even when other cases began to follow, virtually one a day for that last week of June. The next one that came down was the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin. This was a case in which the United States Supreme Court, rather than withdrawing what was understood to be a fundamental right, as they had done in Dobbs early in the week, they basically extended what was understood to be the Second Amendment right to bear arms. And what they ruled is that the New York State statute that set limitations on and required licensing of the right of a person to carry a concealed weapon, pistol, that they struck down the limitations that the state of New York and their legislature had attempted to impose upon this ostensible right to carry a concealed weapon, to the point where they said that it was unconstitutional for any state legislature to try to regulate the time and place at which a person could carry a concealed weapon without any special permit, without any special test, without any special background checks or knowledge of these people, and therefore this second shockwave went out, and you began to see a rising crescendo of opposition to the court coming up in the face of these two decisions, and the opponents of these decisions were stating in the most hyperbolic terms what a disaster this was that was facing our country. That with regard to the Dobbs case, this was, quote, the first time in all of our 240-year history that a fundamental right has been, quote, taken away by the Supreme Court. Once acknowledged and not granted, but acknowledged on the part of the Supreme Court, it had been established tradition that that right would remain. And the court never backtracked and took away a fundamental right. There were many instances in which they had previously declined to acknowledge the existence of a fundamental right, and that they had slowly developed an insight that resulted in them acknowledging the existence of a fundamental right. But once that had been done, it had never reversed itself and taken away that fundamental right. And so the opponents of the Dobbs case were emphasizing this horrendous historical event, a historic event that had taken place of this reactionary Supreme Court withdrawing a fundamental right that we all thought we had. And with regard to the case of the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, they kept up that chant of saying, oh, now look, now while they're taking away a fundamental right of a woman to decide her reproductive decisions with her doctor, here they are now granting and extending the right to these gun carriers to carry guns to church, to carry guns to the shopping mall, to carry guns to movie theaters, to carry guns to school, and so that there was this process taking place now where the opponents of these decisions were feeding into our system the sense that things were coming undone, that the glue was coming out of our society. And that it's not to blame them, but it's to just point out that this was a process that began to happen during the course of that week. Then there was a third case that occurred right that same week, called West Virginia versus the Environmental Protection Agency, in which the Supreme Court struck down the authority of the Environmental Protection Agency, of the executive branch, to issue specific rulings and enforcement guidelines to enforce the Clean Air Act of 1970. That the Environmental Protection Agency under President Obama and his administration had taken it upon themselves to say that, look, in light of the fact that Congress is not agreeing to pass adequately aggressive legislation to stop global climate change, the executive branch and administration of President Obama was going to take executive action. And what they did is, pursuant to Section 1111 of the 1970 Act, Clean Air Act, they began to shut down coal-fired electric generation plants to replace them with solar power, to replace them with wind generation, et cetera. They were doing it under a provision of the 1970 Act, the Clean Air Act, that authorized the executive branch to reduce emissions coming from the coal-fired plants. The administration, the Obama administration, had taken it upon itself to interpret that, to give them the authority to not only reduce the emissions from these coal-fired plants, but to shut them down entirely and to replace them with the sources of sustainable electric power. And so the Supreme Court struck that down. And the opponents of the decision began to announce that the United States Supreme Court now, in addition to having taken away a fundamental right of women to decide their reproductive decisions, and now authorizing gun carriers to carry guns to church and to school, now they were gutting the Environmental Protection Act. They were destroying the ability of our federal government to save us from climate change. And so the cacophony of catastrophe started to increase significantly during the course of that week. And then a fourth decision came down on the fourth day of that week, that was the last week of June of 2022, a case called Vega versus Techo. This was a case in which the United States Supreme Court majority refused to allow a person who had been accused of a criminal offense, who had not been given his Miranda warnings, had not been told that he had a right to have an attorney before he was interrogated by police, had a right to remain silent in the face of coercive police interrogation. He had his rights violated that had been recognized since basically 1972 in the case of of Miranda, Arizona versus Miranda versus Arizona. That case had established the famous Miranda warnings that before, if you've been arrested by the police, before they could question you or interrogate you, they had to inform you that you had a right to remain silent, and that anything you said pursuant to their interrogation could and would be used against you, and you had a right to have an attorney. What the Supreme Court said is that they were not going to allow you to sue the police if they did that to you, if they interrogated you, They refuse to give you the Miranda warnings. They refuse to allow you to exercise your right to remain silent. If they refuse to inform you that you had a right to an attorney, and they continued to coercively interrogate you, and they got you to say something and used it against you and criminally prosecuted you and convicted you and tried to put you in prison, which virtually everybody viewed as a violation of the fundamental right that a person has not to at least incriminate yourself. That what they did is they said, we're not going to give you the right to enforce that by filing a lawsuit against the police who did that. And so the opposition to that decision rose up and began to say that, look, not only have they taken away the right, fundamental right of women to make decisions about their own reproductive rights, and allowed gun carriers to carry their guns into church and stuff now, and gutted the Environmental Protection Act to prevent and prohibit the federal government from protecting us against the catastrophe of global climate change. Now what they're doing is they're taking away our rights that we have been given by the court to protect ourselves against one of the most basic American concepts of not being coerced by police interrogation to incriminate yourself, okay? And so that the sense of instability that was being generated initially by the January 6th hearings going on, and now with this repeated set of decisions coming from the Supreme Court, destabilizing our sense of what our fundamental rights really are, then a fifth case came up. It was decided in the last day of the session. This is Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta, and this is a case in which the United States Supreme Court ruled that states now have the authority, the constitutional authority, to enforce their state criminal laws on Native American reservations, which were ostensibly a sovereign territory. And it's one of the unique and very limited things that the vast majority of American people even know about or think about with regard to Native people is that, oh, in their reservation territory, they're sovereign areas. They're allowed to have gambling casinos. They're allowed to have, if they want to do certain kind of thing. And so here now, what's happening is this same Supreme Court is withdrawing the sovereign authority of Native American people who had been so savagely abused in our history, and whose children had been dragged away from them and put in these boarding schools. And they're finding hundreds and hundreds of graves now of these children secretly buried on the grounds of these homes, these Indian schools where they were kidnapped and taken to. And now here's this same court taking away one of the fundamental premises of the sovereignty, the remaining vestiges of sovereignty of the Native people, in allowing the states, who everyone knows are extraordinarily hostile to the Native people inside their state, to come onto their reservations and arrest people and prosecute them in the territory of the indigenous people. So taken as a whole, there were these series of decisions daily coming down from this United States Supreme Court in the final week of its session here in 2022. And virtually every one of these decisions was shaking the foundations of our American society. And the moderates and liberals and progressives were responding with this constant reportage coming out about how catastrophic the consequences of these opinions were going to be. And the Democratic Party, of course, as we all experienced, was seizing upon each of these cases to say, look, if you're shocked and offended by what this court is doing, you need to vote for Democrats here in the upcoming election in November of 2022. You have to make sure that the Democratic Party maintains control of the House of Representatives, that the Democratic Party only has 5 more members than the Republicans have in the House of Representatives, and they're actually tied 50-50 in the United States Senate. And if you are really upset about these decisions, as we've been going to such great lengths to make sure that you were, you need to vote for the Democrats in your congressional elections and in the 1/3 of Senate elections that are going to be held here in November. And so that political party, the Democratic Party, seized upon this opportunity to try to improve the predicted consequences of the upcoming November 2022 elections, in which virtually all of the prognostications are suggesting that they're going to lose control of the House of Representatives, and they're going to lose control of the Senate. And that's going to set the stage for the ultimate disaster in 2024 of Donald Trump being the nominee of the Republican Party and running for election again and winning, even though he's predicted to lose the significant majority of the votes of the people. And so here we are faced again with this horrible, disquieting, and destabilizing situation of having Donald Trump elected, even though the Democratic Party nominee would be getting as many as 3 to 4 million more votes in the country than he did. And so what is going on here? What is happening here? The things seem to be falling apart. Everything seems to be coming unglued. The assumptions that we had about our polity are now being thrown into question. And so that and all of this is taking place in the much larger context of not only massive war going on, being reported daily over in the Ukraine with Russia, our longtime arch nemesis, fulfilling the worst predictions of the reactionaries, that they're going to be invading Europe and trying to take over all of Europe and impose authoritarian totalitarianism on all of Europe, and then of course us if they can. And the even larger global context of the onset of the worst consequences now of global climate change, that we have not only 110, 112 degree temperatures in the country here, like in Phoenix and other places, but all of India experiences a full week of 120 degree temperatures. And what is happening to our planet? Everything is becoming disoriented. Okay, and so that I'm setting that as the context for our discussion of this more narrow question of the actual decisions that are being made here by the United States Supreme Court. Because what I want to do is taking up Jim's theme at the beginning of our conversation here today, is that it's extraordinarily important that people try to get reoriented, to become centered, when everyone around you is losing their minds, as it were. How can you orient yourself, your sense of self, in these profoundly disoriented times? Okay, so that's the issue that we're here today to talk about, in addition to the particulars of these cases. And I want to make a few comments about that. The first and most important comment is that it's extremely important to understand that this fundamental dialectic that we spoke about yesterday, that appears to be going on between the reactionaries that are in charge of the Supreme Court now, and in charge of the Republican Party, versus the liberals, as they keep referring to them, the liberals on the court, Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, and now Justice Brown Jackson, having replaced Breyer. This fundamental dialectic that is going on allegedly between the reactionaries, who have more recently seized control of the Republican Party from its traditional conservatives, that the reactionaries have taken control of the Republican Party, and they're making war on not only the progressives, whom they characterize as communists, but also liberals, whom they also characterize as communists, but also the moderates. And people are saying, oh, Faith and Begora, here we have the reactionaries attacking even the moderates. So this is a terribly dangerous situation that we have. This is sort of like Germany in the 1930s, with the brown shirts, wandering the streets with torches and assaulting people in the streets whom they view to be disloyal to the rising fascist government. This is the kind of language that we hear all the time now about characterizing what's going on here. So what I want to do is I want to, if you will, reorient our discussion and help orient us in this historical moment. Okay. So first of all, the thing that I make very clear is that the fundamental dynamics of debate in counterpunctual discussion of one position versus a different position is not profoundly between just the reactionaries and the progressives. There are really, as I pointed out yesterday in my comments, that the real dynamic of discussion among the human family that's taking place is between and among the adherents to 8 different, totally self-referentially consistent worldviews that you've heard about in the past. But it's important to refresh our recollection about what the nature of the real dialogical dynamic is that's going on with regard to all of these issues. And that is the debate and discussion that's going on among, on the extreme right, of the reactionary or the authoritarians in our human family. And you move progressively to the left from the extreme right of the political spectrum, from the authoritarians to reactionaries that we're talking about here, to conservatives, to moderates, to liberals, to progressives, to utopianists, and then to this ultimate 8th paradigm worldview, which is the worldview that we have to have if we really try to orient ourselves in the context of there being other highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but categorically non-human other sentient beings here right in our own galaxy that we tend to be oblivious to. And that we try to orient ourselves toward a belief of believing that we, human beings, our Homo sapien species, is in fact at the very apex of the pyramid of all sentient life in the entire universe. And that the entire rest of the universe, other than our planet, is in fact nothing more than the stage on which to play out the drama of our single species rising from the primordial slime of pre-sentient life up through the process of evolution to ascending to these highly conscious beings that will venture out into the stars to share our life on other planets. Okay, and this is the fundamental underlying theme and thesis and set of assumptions of the orientation that the leading institutions of our human family want to convey. And with the exception of the 8th paradigm worldview, of the post-contact worldview that is still in the process of being developed. All of the other 7 major worldviews all share this same fundamental erroneous assumption that our human species is alone in the universe and is at the pinnacle and apex of the pyramid of life. It turns out that's not true. And this is one of the potentially most disorienting facts that is going to come to be known in the comparative near future. And so that our experience in trying to reorient ourselves and get ourselves oriented in this period of disoriented times is extraordinarily important for at least 2 reasons. One is to deal with the short-term issues that are facing us on our planet and in our country right now, but also to prepare ourselves for a process of reorientation in the context of the larger reality that not only is going to become more and more obvious to us in the near future, but that has always been true, and that we've always been functioning in our human family for the most part with this completely erroneous assumption about the centrality of our species in the entire unfolding of our cosmos. Okay, so I just want to set the kind of larger theme here for us to understand what's going on, and then I want to step back. Secondly, to this additional point that all of the disorientation, the comparative short-term disorientation that we're experiencing now really flows from a set of decisions that were made back in 1991. And Jim Garrison and I were both present and participants in that process. And this was the decision on the part of President Mikhail Gorbachev, the President of the Soviet Union, to decide to disband the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, the nation state that had been established subsequent to the October Revolution of 1917 in Russia. Now, all of us here know that from that date of 1917, October of 1917, and the establishment of the Soviet Union, the dominant theme and dynamic of almost all public life in Western civilization was oriented around this dialectic that the Soviet Union had risen to power, and they were this total threat to the world, and that they were going to be trying to take over the entire world and establish an authoritarian government on our planet under the USSR. And so it generated this Cold War. And the Cold War started not, in fact, in 1945 at the end of the World War II, which is the position of most historians. This dynamic of the Cold War started really in October of 1917, when the Bolshevik Revolution overthrew Tsar Nicholas II, a rampant aristocrat and elitist of the mode of the European monarchs that we withdrew from back in the establishment of the United States government here in the United States. Okay, that collapse of the Tsar in Russia in October of 1917, and the upsurge of the Bolsheviks establishing a power there. That what happened, and I would say that 99.99% of the people in the United States, even among those who are really well educated, do not know that what happened is Robert Lansing, who was the Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson at that point in time, launched a major military expedition from the United States and sent a military expeditionary force into Russia to try to militarily crush the Bolshevik Revolution, and initiated this dynamic of dialectic against them. And that was in Robert Lansing. You have to understand who he was. Robert Lansing, in addition to, or more importantly, is a generative fact of becoming the Secretary of State for Woodrow Wilson, was in fact the son-in-law of John W. Foster, who was the Secretary of State back in 1893 that initiated the age of imperialism of the United States. Going into Hawaii and overthrowing them in Guam and the Pacific Islands, instigating the Spanish-American War to invade and occupy Cuba, the Mexican-American War, all that period of the American age of imperialism, that he was heir to that. He was, in fact, a protege of John W. Foster. And John W. Foster was the grandfather of John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. And that this element inside the United States that was promoting and promulgating an elite aristocratic form of government here in our country is who Robert Lansing was. And so that period that began in October of 1917 of setting this umbrella over all of our world of this bipolar dialectical confrontation between the Soviet Union and the Western powers, led primarily by the United States, was the overarching ethos that dominated the thinking of all of us in Western civilization from basically October of 1917 all the way up until December of 1991, when President Gorbachev signed the release of all of the Soviet republics, allowing them to become independent, and withdrew from the Cold War. Now, Jim and I were part of that, if I may say so. Jim was the one, Jim and I were basically at the Jesuit headquarters at that time. We had met each other at the Harvard Divinity School in 1973, but by 1975 and 76, that we were together at the Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C. I was the co-director of the National Social Ministry Office of the Jesuit Order, the largest single order in the Catholic Church, which is the largest single denomination, religious denomination in Western civilization. And we were there, and Jim was in charge of the nuclear weapons policy, trying to eliminate nuclear weapons. And he personally was involved in going to all the Catholic bishops and getting all of them on board to agree to oppose the mere possession of nuclear weapons as a mortal sin, actually, because nuclear weapons are inherently designed to kill civilian populations. They're not tactical, and they're not designed for battlefield use. They are designed to utterly destroy the entire civilian population of any opponent, and therefore totally violative of all the fundamental premises of the just war theory. Now, I don't want to get too far into that, but the bottom line is that Jim went over directly to meet with Gorbachev early on in the process of trying to establish a regime pursuant to which the Soviet Union and the Western allies would disassemble the nuclear weapons of all of us so as to save humanity from our own self-destruction in a completely irrational exchange of nuclear weapons. So that Jim went over and met with Gorbachev to discuss this process, pursuant to which Jim became the president of the Gorbachev Foundation and helped work with all of us to establish, after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from the Cold War on December 31st of 1991, to establish a whole regime of meetings called the State of the World Forum to gather former, now retired presidents of all the nation states, their secretaries of state, their secretaries of defense, their secretaries of treasury, to come together here in San Francisco to talk about how we establish a new regime at the end of the Cold War. How can we establish a more cooperative, mutually beneficial, peaceful paradigm pursuant to which we can function before one or the other of us decides to identify some new ultimate other, to try to establish some new overarching dialectic in the world. So the bottom line is, getting back to this, what I'm saying is that when the Gorbachev signed the decree releasing all of the republics of the Soviet Union and withdrawing from the Cold War, what happened here in the United States was, they remember that in December 31st of 1991, the president of the United States was George Bush Sr. His Secretary of Defense was Dick Cheney. His Assistant Secretary of Defense was Paul Wolfowitz. These people gathered in the White House the following Monday after December 31st of 1991, and they held a meeting. And they decided that rather than step back from the Cold War and disarm and reduce the military budget, they were going to try to increase the military budget, because this provided the unique opportunity with the withdrawal of the Soviet Union from the Cold War for the United States to establish, quote, full spectrum dominance over the planet, pursuant to which they could continue to maintain, quote, their privileged access to the strategic raw materials needed by our major corporations to increase our comparative wealth to everybody in the world. This caused the Republican Party to move from, a place on a spectrum. If you have 100 degrees to the right of center and 100 degrees to the left of center, the Republican Party at that point in time was maybe 25 degrees to the right of center. But what happened is that when the Soviet Union withdrew from the Cold War, the leadership of the Republican Party under George Bush Sr. and Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz and these other people, they moved the entire Republican Party over to like 75 degrees to the right of center. And what happened is the Democratic Party, caught in its own mind in a dialectic with the Republican Party, said, what good is it going to do us to remain 25 degrees to the left of center, where the Democratic Party had sort of come to rest in the context of the Cold War? And if the Republican Party is going to go to 75 degrees to the left to the right of center, why don't we go over to about 10 to 20 degrees to the right of center? And what we're going to do is we're going to establish a new Democratic Leadership Conference, and we're going to establish a new, quote, more moderate Democratic Party. And we're going to eschew all of the values of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal and the progressive era in the United States. And we're going to become a more moderate to conservative political party. And what's happened is that was the beginning of the major strategic disorienting of our American culture. And that's what began to happen. And so that what happened is when the Republican Party leadership saw that the Democratic Party was not going to maintain liberal, much less progressive values, but they were going to come over to the right side of the political spectrum and become moderate to conservative, they said, why don't we just continue going farther and farther to the right? Because the Democratic Party is just following us, because they're abandoning the progressive principles, and they're going to start taking watered down Republican principles, and so why don't we start becoming more and more radical? And that's what happened. That's why the Republican Party has been, quote, taken over by these extreme reactionaries, and that's why it was inevitable that they would select somebody like Donald Trump, who was a megalomaniacal multi-millionaire that lives in palatial palaces with gold-plated toilets, in French furniture, down at Mar-a-Lago. This is what has happened here. So it's extraordinarily, and then of course he appoints people to the Supreme Court where they have the same values, and that's what we're facing here. So it's extraordinarily important for us to understand that these set of decisions that have been issued by our United States Supreme Court in the last week of June of 2022 in the hearings of January 6th to look into the actual physical assault on our Capitol building, led by Donald Trump and his acolytes in the Republican Party, is in fact a rational and almost predictable consequence of these decisions that were made on the part of the leadership of the Republican Party under George Bush Sr. And his Donald or Dick Cheney, his vice president, who became the functional president under George Bush's son, W. Bush. That you have to get a larger perspective on what the source of the destabilization and the disorientation is that we're all experiencing here. And so the fundamental question becomes, how do we reorient ourselves, or in fact orient ourselves in the context of this larger destabilization that is taking place right now? We tried to address that in the State of the World Forum, Jim and myself and Sarah Nelson, our executive director here at the Romero Institute, and many other people. What we wanted to do is to try to have a collective reorientation of our human family to establish a new paradigm pursuant to which we could all pursue collectively a much more peaceful, mutually profitable, and advantageous life. And what happened is that the advocates of reaction were threatened by that. And so what they did is they began to seek out and to search to find a new ultimate other adversary, because they thrive on the dialectic. That's what reactionaries are. Reactionaries are adherents to the second paradigm worldview, which is a fundamentally dialectical, bipolar, confrontational worldview. Now, I won't go too far, but it's rooted in a basic cosmological premise about the oscillation of the universe, from the state of absolute energy to absolute mass, back to absolute energy, the oscillating universe, what they call the magna manus of the universe, the gigantic year of the universe. But the bottom line is there are profound and fundamental metaphysical and philosophical underpinnings to trying to understand what's really going on here. But from a more simple way of looking at it, we need to understand basically that what we're seeing, the disorientation that we're seeing from the Supreme Court, from the Republican Party, from the January 6th hearings that are going on, are in fact symptoms of a much larger disorientation that is still underway about the end of the Cold War, in the effort on the part of the reactionaries who have taken control of the Republican Party to establish and maintain an ultimate other that they want to maintain, and that's what they're driving right now to try to take power. They're trying to take over the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the White House, if they can, with Donald Trump as the president again, and if not, with DeSantis, out of Florida, the reactionary governor of Florida. That's what they're attempting to do, and so that we need to orient ourselves around this process that is really going on here, and not spend all of our time trying to just demonize the particular members of the Supreme Court, or even just demonize Donald J. Trump. What we've got to understand is that this process that is going on is a function of the dialogical dynamic that goes on in the discussion among the adherents to the 8 worldviews of our human family. And so that a coalition needs to be established among the moderate, liberal, progressive, and utopian adherents in, might I say, the 8th paradigm adherents that are on the left of the political spectrum, in order to establish a coalition that can stand off this aggressive assault on the part of the reactionaries, of the second paradigm, because they joined forces with the authoritarians of the first paradigm worldview, and they're making war on all the rest of us. Okay, and so that we have to try to get reoriented to understand what this fundamental underlying disorientation is right now, and we need to get back to the discussion that we initiated at the State of the World Forum about identifying a new paradigm, a fundamental paradigm that can replace the dynamic of the dialectic. Okay, and so that I want to hasten to warn us not to get trapped in another dialectic. I don't want to have the false impression of what I'm trying to suggest is that we establish an alliance among the moderates, liberals, progressives, utopianists, and the eighth paradigm people to set up a dialectic against the reactionaries and the authoritarians. I mean, that would be just falling prey to what they want. They want to have a dialectic like that. What I'm suggesting is that we need to spread out the discussion among all 8 worldviews, not just have a dialectical confrontation, because that's their game. If you get into the dialectic with them, they love that. It's like, being lured into a bar fight. If you go to a place, a local restaurant or something, and someone's drunk and they want to have a fight in the bar, you just got to not do that. Okay, so we have to be careful about this right now. And so that what I want us to do is I want us to think in terms of having this. This is what the Romero Institute is all about. The Romero Institute, as I pointed out yesterday, that I'm the president of, and Sarah Nelson is the executive director of. Sarah Nelson was the executive director of the State of the World Forum when Jim was the director and the president of the State of the World Forum. Also having been the president of the Gorbachev Foundation, which is all a result of Jim having gone over to talk with Gorbachev pursuant to our mutual objectives of trying to get both the Soviet Union and the United States to begin the active disarmament of the nuclear weapons. Okay, so that's getting you oriented to, why is it that I'm here, talking with Jim Garrison to you in the context of the Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising and the Romero Institute. What is it that we're up to here? What we're up to is trying to assist all of us in not only reorienting ourselves, but orienting ourselves in a more cosmic way, a cosmically grounded way, to get ourselves oriented not only for dealing with this onslaught from the reactionaries and authoritarians, but to orient ourselves in a way that is going to prepare ourselves for the realization that there is, in fact, another extraterrestrial civilization that we're a part of, and that in our lifetimes, we're going to be confronted with that reality. And it is going to threaten a much greater disorientation and destabilization. And so that we need to begin a conversation now about what the profound, fundamental, philosophical, theological, public policy, sociological, and psychological questions are that we need to ask and answer in order to prepare ourselves to show that our human family is worthy of participating as a rational, trustworthy member of a larger civilization that we're actually a part of. And at the present time, we are embargoed because we are dangerous. We are armed with thermonuclear weapons. We're spending vast portions of our common wealth in trying to develop even more lethal weapons and more sophisticated weapons and attack each other and not sharing the resources of the planet and caring for and husbanding the resources of the planet in a way that is in proper balance. And we're basically on the brink of self-destruction through global climate change. And so this is a much larger context for understanding the kind of reorientation that we need to take right now. And so that's why I raised this in the context of all of us getting extremely heated up about the United States Supreme Court, getting all heated up about, the January 6th hearings, getting all heated up about the elections that are coming up this fall in November, and getting totally freaked out about the potential election in 2004, in all putting pressure on Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, to hurry up and criminally indict Donald Trump and get him convicted of seditious conspiracy so that he'll be officially disqualified from running for the presidency in 2024. So, what I'm saying is that what Jim and I want to do is we want to invite you into a larger discussion, a more profound discussion, to try to orient ourselves and have us be able to all assist each other in this discussion, to try to figure out what our collective insights are into the fundamental underlying assumptions of the larger context in which our human species exists, which of course are the four pillar questions, the fundamental pillar questions that all human beings have to ask ourselves in order to try to, dare I say, orient ourselves to reality. And these are, as been pointed out by Dr. Ralph Potter, who is the chairman of the Department of Comparative Social Ethics, because our orientation is what generates our ethical principles. We're always trying to make decisions that are consistent with our assumptions about the basic bulwark of reality. That's what we're doing. And so we have to ask ourselves these fundamental questions about, how did our universe come into being? This is the ultimate cosmological question. The question that is being sought now by the James Webb Telescope that we're all kind of following. They put up the brand new telescope and it's searching out to discover the absolute farthest physical reaches of our physical universe, to try to determine the initial generating event of our entire universe. And the answer that we provide to this question about the origins of our universe are extraordinarily important and profound. And the second fundamental pillar question we have to ask ourselves is, what is that's the cosmological question. The second question is the teleological question. That is, how is our universe unfolding? Is it unfolding towards some specific end? Is there some particular moment or achievement that our universe is designed to generate? Thirdly, the what they call ontological question is, what is the source of consciousness in the universe? How did these apparently, or at least allegedly, inanimate physical objects in the universe, of the different elements, how did they come together to actually generate consciousness? Or might consciousness have actually generated the material realm? Okay, this is the ontological question. And the final, fourth pillar question is the epistemological question, and that is, what are the means that we have at our disposal as human beings by means of which we can possibly answer questions like that? What are the faculties that we have by means of which we can discern accurately and trustworthily, what objective reality is? Are we limited to the application of our intellect to the data taken in by our five senses of our sight and smell and taste and touch, et cetera? Or might we actually be evolving additional faculties? Might there actually be a sixth sense, a faculty by means of which we can, as human beings, directly experientially encounter and experience the unity phenomenon that binds every single ultimately irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into one unified harmonious whole? And might we, by dint of that experience, actually be able to experientially determine what type of human conduct, individually or collectively, individually and collectively, is either harmonious with or disharmonious to the entire natural order of the universe? I'm talking serious orientation here. I'm not talking about temporary orientation. I'm not talking about, rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic and thinking that, the deck chairs are in perfect order, so we're okay. We're not. We have to reorient ourselves, not just in the aftermath of the exploration of the Cold War, but in preparation for the discovery that we are not alone in the universe. This is the ultimate reorientation that we have to have. And if we can begin to fill out the details of the eighth paradigm worldview, this new paradigm worldview, it can join into the discussion with the other 7 major human worldviews to be able to generate an overarching reorientation of our human family, which may well be the secret in keeping us from fighting with each other and setting up these false dialectics that we raised and talked about yesterday with the discovery of Margaret Mead in the Fiji Islands about our inherent kind of biological inclination toward dividing ourselves into 2 camps and fighting with each other and fighting with ourselves. So this is the larger orientation that I'm proposing, and I'm happy to come back and talk about this if people care about this. On Monday and Tuesday that Jim is proposing, because I think this is the secret that has been available to our human family now for many centuries. That there's an open secret that our human family, that we are capable of intentionally turning our attention to the process of elevating our own consciousness, of basically activating these higher capacities that our human family has, these faculties of discernment that are much more subtle, but are equally extraordinary to see the kind of process by means of which the faculties of the eyes evolved biologically to be able to actually physically, experientially discern the vibrational frequencies of light. Same thing with our hearing. To have the organs of not just human beings, but other life forms on our planet, to have teleologically evolved a complex set of sensory neurons to be able to experience the vibrational frequencies of sound. This is an astonishing and extraordinary process that is going on here. And that what we want to do is come to understand what this is so that we can advocate that not only that we undertake the most effective processes we can discern by means of which to accelerate our own personal evolution, but also to be of some assistance to our sisters and brothers of our human species to come to understand that this is a process that we can engage in collectively. And this indeed is the salvation dynamic that has been whispered down through the centuries. And we come upon these statues of sitting Buddhas silently meditating. And we encounter this in all cultures of our human family, that this secret has been discovered, that there is a process, a set of processes actually, by means of which we can stimulate and accelerate this particular evolutionary process. That's what we're talking about here. That's why this is not just another chat about the Supreme Court decisions, or even about the January 6th events, or about what's going on politically here in the last 50 years. This is a profound discussion about the orientation, not only of each and every one of us, but of all of us collectively, to save ourselves from destroying ourselves, either through thermonuclear war or through global climate change or some other major self-inflicted catastrophe, which is a function of our own limited perception of all the dimensions of reality. So that's the word for today. I guess it may be a little different conversation about the Supreme Court cases than you might have expected. But diving into the particular details of each and every one of them is just basically to tell you that the decisions are not as earth-shaking as has been proposed by a lot of the opponents of these decisions. I'm not justifying these decisions. What I'm saying is, for example, in the EPA case, what they really did is just said that the executive branch of the Obama administration exceeded its executive authority to try to read into one provision of the Clean Air Act of 1970 that it had the right to not only regulate and reduce the emissions from coal-fired electric power plants, but they could eliminate them entirely and totally replace them with sustainable energy sources. I agree with doing something like that, but I tend to agree with them that it wasn't intended by the legislature that passed the 1970 Clean Air Act under Richard Nixon to authorize the complete elimination of the coal-fired plants. We have to figure out some other way of eliminating the coal-fired plants, but that isn't the right way. Now, and it was, of course, it was a decision that was undertaken in the larger context of the 6 judges on the court, believing that they ought to go much farther. They don't believe we ought to be able to eliminate global climate change at all because it would undermine rather the power and authority of the fossil fuel industry, which they're basically corporate lawyers in support of. But that's the larger threat that we're faced with here. So that we have to try to figure out how to address these short-term disorienting events and midterm or disorienting events. But we have to do so by having a much more strategic and much more profound discussion about what are the criteria pursuant to which we have to orient ourselves. Okay, so that's what I'm proposing. So that's my kind of wrap today.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much. I appreciated your reference to Gorbachev and the actions that he took and your and my involvement in the way in which we participated. Those were great days. Those were one of those moments where you were in the corridors of power and you were on the cusp of history as it was turning, and you knew you were playing a small but important role in what was unfolding. So I appreciated you bringing it up. It filled me with nostalgia of some of those adventures that we had. But I think the larger point that you're making is so important, that we need to be seeing the particulars within the context of the whole. And the whole that I think you continue to point to yesterday and today is the whole of the spiritual evolution of consciousness of human beings, so that they not only can embrace each other, but fundamentally embrace the reality that we are not alone in the universe. And that fact in and of itself should cause us to reevaluate how we're treating each other and how we're treating this planet. Encountering extraterrestrial intelligence may be the most important catalyst for the kind of transformation of consciousness that we all need to take place. But for some reason, we don't seem to be able to get at least enough of a change of consciousness at a mass level sufficient to really alter the course of a disintegrating historical process. So I just want to thank you for it. And to say, everyone, that Danny's going to be back next Monday and Tuesday. And on Monday, he's going to be talking about the Romero Institute that for the last 50 years has been really on the front lines of justice. And then on Tuesday, he's going to be talking about the Disclosure Project, which is the latest information that he and others have been garnering about the realities of UFOs, but also the pressure that is now gathering momentum for the US and other governments to disclose, literally, the Disclosure Project, some of the information that has been held top secret and classified for, in some cases, many decades, around the incontrovertible fact that we've been visited by extraterrestrial civilizations. And for some reasons, our governments don't want us to know that. So Danny, among other things, has been on the forefront of that. But as we close, Danny, just thinking of the elections coming up and thinking about what we can do politically at this crucial moment, given the fact that the anvil now is around politics for the next 6 months. What's your advice for people? How can people most effectively be politically engaged, in your view?
Well, I think, again, I think I'm going to say some stuff that probably is more surprising to people, is that the two most important people that they need to pay attention to, they might assume to be Donald Trump and President Biden. Or there may be a third candidate in there is Vice President Kamala Harris. But really, the two people they ought to be really looking at is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Russ Feingold. That people are just, who is Russ Feingold? Russell Feingold was the United States Senator from Wisconsin for 2 full terms before he was unseated by the extreme right-wing Republican Party that put into place Ron Johnson, this kind of numbskull who has been deeply involved in the January 6th insurrection. And Russ Feingold is now the director of the American Constitution Society. This is the group that is attempting to neutralize the Federalist Society that is dominating the United States Supreme Court decisions right now. And Russ Feingold, when he was a United States Senator for 2 terms in Wisconsin, was the only other United States Senate member other than Bernie Sanders, who was a member of the Progressive Caucus in the United States Congress. He was the most articulate and auspicious voice for the progressive cause in the Congress of the United States. It's why he was targeted 6 years ago by the right reactionaries in the Republican Party to get rid of him. And the other person, of course, is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is the most prominent spokesperson for the progressive cause in all of Congress right now. And what people don't understand about her, people go, oh, she's such a young person. The fact of the matter is that on November 13th of 2024, approximately a month before the 2024 election, she turns 35 years old, which makes her constitutionally qualified to be a candidate for the presidency of the United States. Okay? And therefore for vice president of the United States. And Russ Feingold is the guy who, in a partnership between them, could mobilize the American Constitution Society, of which he's the head of, and the Progressive Caucus in the United States Congress, of which she is probably the most preeminent spokesperson for, to give rise to a major progressive offenses to establish, because all we're hearing right now is on the front pages of the New York Times is, oh, isn't Joe Biden too old and too weak to really run again? But woe is us, all we have is Kamala Harris as a potential alternative, who they don't believe can beat, whoever the Republican Party puts up in 2024. So we've got to have a much more strategic conversation here to be able to reveal to people certain pieces of important information that they haven't thought about. Because the problem is people say, everything I can think about leads to despair. So stop thinking like that. Get outside of that box and start thinking about what you need to think about. We need to work at reaching out to Russ Feingold as the head of the American Constitution Society and to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez as the leading spokesperson for the progressive movement in the country, and mobilize the young people. I mean, can you imagine that the people between 18 and 30 are going to come out to vote for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? And the progressives are going to come out to support Russ Feingold. And they're going to be able to together articulate a set of principles and premises that actually present a concrete, constructive alternative to the reactionary, fear-filled, hostile agenda that the Republican Party is going to be proposing in 2024. We've got to get started and get started now.
Beautiful. That's an unexpected answer. Russell Feingold, everyone, just take in that name. And of course, Alexandria Cortez. Secondly, wouldn't that be a dream ticket, a Feingold Cortez ticket for the presidency of the United States? It would certainly put the cat amongst the chickens in the Democratic Party.
The chickens are all molting right now. The chickens of the Democratic Party are all molting right now. So it's time for a shift of leadership.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny. This has been a wonderful discussion. We'll continue it next Monday, Tuesday, as I said. I want to encourage everyone to go on the website of romeroinstitute.org. That'll be our subject for Monday and what they're doing through the Lakota People's Law Project and Let's Green California, their most recent endeavors that Danny will be telling us about. And then on Tuesday, we'll be diving into this extraordinary phenomenon of the UFOs. Thank you, everyone. You're welcome to the after session chat group. You'll see the link in the chat. And we'll see you then again tomorrow, Friday, for a discussion with Gary Lachman, who is a journalist. He's just written an extraordinary book on the mystical soul of Russia. So we're going to hear the mystical history of Russia from Gary Lachman tomorrow here on Humanity Rising. That does it for us for today. Danny, thank you. And we'll see you again here on Monday. Bye, everyone.
See you all Monday.